Welcome back to True Crime for Sleep. If you have thoughts on this case, leave a comment and consider liking and subscribing. Tonight, you're stepping into Springfield, Missouri, and into the unanswered disappearance of the Springfield Three. It's early Sunday, June 7th, 1992, and you're standing at 1717 East Del Mar. The neighborhood is quiet in that ordinary way. Lawns trimmed, curtains drawn, nothing volunteering a confession. You test the front door and it gives unlocked, like someone expected to be home any minute. Inside, the house looks lived in. Purses still there, cars still out front, cigarettes and a soda left behind. No shattered furniture, no note on the counter, no obvious blood, just routine paused mid-breath. You walk room to room and you feel the ugly math settle in, because this isn't chaos, it's control. So how do you remove 3 people from a small house without a scream, a witness, or a usable first-hour trail? You stand in the entryway a second longer than you should. You let your eyes adjust to the dim, the kind of dim that makes a clean home look guilty. You notice the air first. Not stale, not panicked, just normal house air with a hint of smoke. Cigarettes, recent enough to still feel like someone is just in the next room. You tell yourself the simplest thing. Maybe they stepped out for breakfast. Maybe they ran to a convenience store. Maybe you are about to feel stupid for worrying. Then you see the purses, not tucked away, not packed, not staged for a trip, just left like an afterthought on the edge of life. And you feel it, that small drop in your stomach that never comes with good news. Because people do not leave purses behind when they are choosing to go. Not 3 people at once. Not a teenage girl, not her friend, not a mother who has lived long enough to know better. You walk deeper, careful, without meaning to be. You are not a cop yet, not officially in this moment, but your body already knows the drill. Look for the noise that should be there. A television hum, a running faucet, a dog barking, anything. Instead, you get the refrigerator's soft motor and your own breathing. And then the phone rings. It cuts through the quiet like a wire snapping. You freeze because the ring feels wrong inside an empty house. You let it ring once more, as if the caller might explain everything. Then you make your first decision point, the one you will replay later. Do you answer and risk stepping on something important? Or do you let it ring and call police first? You choose the human thing. You pick up, you say hello, and your voice sounds too loud. There is a pause on the other end, the kind that makes you imagine someone listening to the room. Then a wrong voice speaks, casual and unfamiliar. They ask for one of the girls, like this is any other Sunday. You say she is not here, and you listen for surprise, for fear, for anything. The caller hangs up fast. You stand there with the receiver in your hand, and you hate how ordinary it was. Because ordinary is what predators borrow. Ordinary is what they use to get close. You set the receiver down, and you finally do what you should have done first. You call it in. You call the police, and you describe the scene with the kind of restraint that makes dispatchers ask follow-up questions. No blood, no forced entry, no screaming neighbors, just 3 people missing and a house left mid-sentence. While you wait, you move again, because waiting inside a quiet house feels like holding your breath underwater. You glance at the living room, neat enough to be photographed for a listing. You notice a television, a few scattered items, the shape of a normal night that ended normally. But normal nights do not erase 3 bodies from a house. You check the kitchen and you see a soda cup, left out like the person who drank it meant to come back. You feel the small anger rise because you know what that means. Interruption. A routine cut off cleanly, like someone pressed pause with authority. You drift toward the bedrooms, and each step makes you more aware of how quiet the street outside must have been. If there was a fight, nobody heard it. If there was a scream, it did not escape the walls. And you do not like what that implies. Control does not require noise. Control requires timing, confidence, and something that convinces you to cooperate. A badge, a familiar face, a gun held low, not to shoot, just a promise. You glance at the windows, half expecting one to be cracked or jimmied, but they look fine, curtains still drawn with that modest suburban caution. Congratulations, you think the house is not going to hand you an easy answer. You hear a car door outside. Then another. Friends, neighbors, the kind of people who show up when something feels off. They crowd the porch, calling names softly at first, then louder. You watch them step in, one by one, and you feel another kind of dread. Because people mean well, and evidence does not care. A hand on a doorknob. A shoe print on carpet. A cigarette butt picked up and tossed away because it looks messy. Every helpful gesture is a little eraser. You tell them to slow down, to stop touching, to wait. But you can hear how your voice wobbles. You are asking civilians to behave like a crime scene team, and the house does not look like a crime scene. It looks like a sleepover that ran long. It looks like a mother's place that still smells faintly of coffee and smoke. It looks like a misunderstanding, and misunderstandings do not summon police cars. You step outside to get air, and the morning hits you. Warm already, that early summer warmth that makes lawns look too green. You look at the driveway and see the vehicles, still parked like loyal dogs. Suzie Streeter's car is there. Sherrill Levitt's car is there. All present, all silent. If the women left willingly, they did it on foot or in someone else's ride. And 3 women do not pile into a stranger's vehicle at dawn without a reason. You hear the first siren in the distance. It grows, then fades as the car turns into the neighborhood. A patrol unit rolls up, slow, respectful, like the officer is trying not to scare the street. He steps out, and you can see the mental checklist behind his eyes. Missing persons, not confirmed crime. Keep it calm. But the longer he looks, the less calm he gets. He asks who lives here, who was last seen, what time. You tell him what you know, and you realize how little you actually have. Gone. Sometime after last night. No note, no obvious struggle. And the officer's face tightens in the way that says he understands the problem. Because missing adults are tricky, and missing teenagers are urgent, and missing 3 people from one house with their belongings behind is something else. That is not a walk away. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a removal. The officer calls for more units, and now the street begins to feel watched. Neighbors peek through curtains that were closed 5 minutes ago. A man mowing his lawn slows down, then stops entirely. A woman on the sidewalk pretends she is out for exercise, but her eyes are fixed on the house. You feel the neighborhood shifting from quiet to curious, from curious to afraid. And fear is contagious, even in nice places. The officer asks about the last known night. You say you think the girls were out at graduation parties? You say you think they came here after? Because that was the plan. You watch him write it down, and you see the pivot happen. He is no longer looking for a lost trio. He is building a timeline. And time, in cases like this, is a cruel currency. Every hour spent hoping is an hour the trail cools. The phone rings again inside the house. Someone answers, because of course, someone does. They hold the receiver like it might bite them. They listen, then cover the mouthpiece and whisper that it is a man again, that it sounds weird, that it sounds like he is playing around. The officer takes the receiver, listens, and his posture changes. He asks the caller to identify himself. The line goes dead. Now you have a pattern. Not proof, not yet, but a shape. Someone is calling the house, and someone is not interested in speaking to police. The officer asks about an answering machine. He is thinking the same thing you are thinking now. If they called, maybe they left a message, maybe a threat, maybe a slip. You find the machine, and it is sitting there like it always has, dumb plastic with a blinking light. A friend says there was a message earlier, something odd. A voice, maybe male, maybe prankish, maybe not. They say it was wiped accidentally or recorded over. The story changes slightly each time, the way stories do when people are ashamed. You feel your jaw tighten, because that blinking light could have held a lifeline, and now it holds nothing. Congratulations. You think again, this is how a case starts dying. Not with a gunshot, not with a scream, but with a well-meaning thumb on the wrong button. The officer asks everyone to leave the house. He does not shout, but his tone has weight now. He is trying to stop the bleeding, the evidence bleeding, the timeline bleeding. People file out reluctantly, like they are being asked to abandon the women. You stand on the porch while he radios in the situation. 3 females missing, possible abduction, need detectives, need crime scene. You listen to the code words, and you realize how quickly the system has to decide what this is. Because if they call it voluntary, they wait. And if they wait, they lose. Minutes later, more police arrive. They string a kind of invisible boundary with their bodies, telling neighbors to back up. A detective shows up, looking tired already, hair not quite combed, eyes still stuck in last night. He walks in, scans, and you can see him noticing the same details you did. Purses, cars, shoes, makeup, little anchors of ordinary life, still in place. He asks about the women, and you say their names out loud. Suzie Streeter, 19. Stacy McCall, 18. Sherrill Levitt, 47. Saying them makes it real in a way the empty rooms do not. The detective asks for the last confirmed sightings, and now you have to rewind the night because the house will not give you anything else. You picture Saturday, June 6th, the graduation day energy still buzzing around Springfield. You picture the girls, fresh diplomas, the kind of pride that feels like permission to stay out late. You picture the parties, the driving, the laughter that sounds invincible. That is what makes this case so mean. It begins in celebration and ends in silence. The detective starts taking statements on the front lawn. He asks who last saw Stacy, who last saw Suzie, what time, where. You watch friends stumble through their answers because teenagers measure time in vibes, not minutes. After the party, later, when we left, it was probably around midnight. Probably. And probably is poison to an investigation. Someone mentions a sleepover planned at another friend's house. A last-minute change. The kind of change that feels harmless. Like choosing a different pizza topping. Except it matters. Because a plan change narrows the witness pool. It reduces the number of adults awake. It moves the girls to a different address, a different set of eyes, and the detective's pen pauses at that detail. He asks who knew about the change, who heard it, who might have overheard it at a party, who might have been told in passing, casually, the way you tell the world where you will be sleeping. You can feel the suspect pool shifting in real time. If someone targeted them, they did not need to stalk all night. They only needed to learn where they ended up. And if the change was spontaneous, the person who acted had to be close enough to capitalize. That means opportunity. That means someone local or someone already in their orbit. The detective asks about Sherrill, the mother. Was she expecting anyone? Was she dating anyone? Did she have problems with anyone? He is careful with the questions, but they are still ugly questions because people want to believe the girls were the target. Young, visible, out late. But the house belongs to Sherrill, and she is the adult in the room. If someone came to that door, they had to deal with her too. And dealing with her means either overpowering her or persuading her. The detective steps inside again, and this time he looks for the small things, the things that are not dramatic enough for television, but loud enough for people who do this for a living. A broken chain lock, a scraped threshold, a scuff mark near the doorway. He kneels near the front, and you see him stare at the floor like it has secrets. You follow his gaze and notice it. A broken porch light globe, pieces collected, not scattered. Not a violent smash, more like something bumped and cleaned up. It is a tiny detail, and you do not know what it means yet. But you store it because this case is going to be built from tiny details. The detective asks again about the calls. How many times did the phone ring? What did the voice sound like? Could you describe it? Deep, nasal, young, old, friendly, angry. You give what you can, and it feels pathetic because voices are slippery memories, and your brain wants to help by inventing confidence. You fight that. You stick to what you know. Male, unfamiliar, calm, ended the call quickly. Not a rant, not a drunk dial. It was controlled. Everything about this morning is controlled, except the people trying to help. Police tape goes up eventually, the bright color turning the house into an accusation. A crime scene tech arrives with gloves and camera, and now it finally looks like what it is. But it is late for that. Friends have walked through. Calls have been answered. The answering machine message is gone, and the house has already been breathed on by a dozen good intentions. The detective does not say it out loud, but you can see him doing the math too. The first hour is the golden hour, and this case did not get one. It got a crowd. Still, you do what you can with what you have. You walk the detective through the rooms, pointing out what seems important. Personal items left behind. Keys that do not look gathered. Shoes that suggest no one dressed for travel. Makeup, hair tools, the little rituals of young women that do not get abandoned unless something interrupts them. The detective nods, and you can see him file it under forced departure. Not voluntary, not a spur-of-the-moment road trip, because road trips require wallets and cigarettes and at least one angry note. There is none of that. There is only absence. So, you do the only thing you can do with absence. You stand in a stranger's living room and realize you have become an accountant of unfinished routines. You look for the things people grab without thinking, because thinking is for later. You check the counters for wallets, for keys, for lipstick, for whatever passes for normal, and you keep finding normal untouched, like it is waiting to be resumed. That is the first reality check of this job. A crime scene is not always violent. Sometimes it is just a paused life, and you are the one who has to press play. The detective asks you to stop moving. He says it politely, but the meaning is sharp. Every step is a footprint, and every fingerprint is a future argument in court. You back up to the doorway like you are exiting a room with a sleeping animal. Now the house belongs to process, gloves, photos, bagged evidence, measured distances that make a home feel like a diagram. You watch technicians shoot pictures of a purse like it is a weapon. Because, in a way, it is. It proves intention. It proves what did not happen, a planned departure. And it proves what probably did happen, coercion. You hear the detective's questions tighten into something more deliberate. Who was supposed to be here last night? Who knew they were here? Who would come to this door without raising suspicion? In a neighborhood like this, suspicion is basically an allergy. People cough when they smell it, but they rarely name it. You step onto the porch to listen to the street. A dog barks 2 houses down, more annoyed than alarmed. A lawn sprinkler ticks in slow arcs, like time is watering itself. You look at the distance between houses and understand something ugly. If someone kept their voice low, if someone moved with confidence, this street might not hear a thing. Especially after midnight, when everyone's defenses are down and their televisions are up. You try to picture it. 3 women inside, 1, maybe 2 people at the door, a brief conversation, then a pivot, a change in tone, a weapon revealed, or an authority claimed, and then compliance. Not because they are weak, because they are human. Humans cooperate when they believe cooperation keeps them alive. That is how you take 3 people without a scream, not with chaos, with a promise that if they do what they are told, it will all be fine. You have heard that promise before. In other cases, it is the oldest lie a predator knows. Inside, someone points out the glass from the porch light. It is broken, but the pieces look gathered, not scattered. You crouch near the entry and imagine someone stepping carefully over it, or someone cleaning it up, fast, because the sound of glass is the one noise you cannot talk your way out of. If it broke during the abduction, you would expect panic, but the house does not show panic. So maybe it broke earlier, or maybe someone broke it, then tidied it, because that is what control looks like. You add it to the list of details that do not confess, but also do not shut up. The detective asks about the vehicles again. He wants to know which car belongs to which woman. He wants to know whether any of them could have left in a different vehicle. You look at the cars and you feel the weight of the obvious. They arrived here in their own cars. They did not leave in them. So someone else provided the exit. And that exit could be parked right in front without anyone noticing. If it looked ordinary, a van, a pickup, a sedan, something that does not scream danger in a driveway at 2 a.m. Springfield is not a city that stays up late. At this hour, a moving vehicle is just a moving vehicle. You can feel how quickly the investigation wants to expand, because a house can only hide so much. If they are not here, they are somewhere else. And somewhere else means roads, turnoffs, parking lots, places that are dark by design. You watch the detective take down the first batch of names. Friends from the graduation crowd, adults connected to Sherrill, neighbors, ex-boyfriends, guys who like to be the center of every story. He writes them all down, because that is what you do at the beginning. At the beginning, everything is possible. Later, you will pay for that possibility with sleeplessness. Someone mentions the girls were at multiple parties, a graduation night carousel, one house, then another, because youth is allergic to endings. You ask for the addresses, the detective asks for times, and you both get the same answer, dressed in different clothes. Late, after midnight, sometime after we left, you try not to let your irritation show. Teenagers do not think in evidence, they think in moments. So you translate. You ask what song was playing. You ask who was still awake. You ask whether the sun was up, whether it was dark, whether the street lights were on, because memory clings to sensory anchors better than it clings to clocks. You learn Stacy and Suzie ended the night at a friend's place first. A last stop that lasted just long enough to become complicated. They were supposed to sleep there, but the house was crowded. Too many bodies, no space. So they pivoted, impulsive, and decided to go to Suzie's place on Delmar. It sounds harmless. It always sounds harmless. You think about how many people knew that plan changed. The girls, the friend's family maybe, anyone awake enough to hear them say it out loud, anyone outside, within earshot, anyone who saw them leave and decided to follow. A plan change is not just a detail, it is a narrowing. It turns a citywide mystery into a handful of intersections. You feel the timeline tighten like a belt. If they left the friend's house after 2 a.m, they likely arrived at Delmar shortly after. That gives you a thin window before sunrise. A thin window in which someone approached, gained control, and removed 3 people. You ask yourself the question you always end up asking. Who is awake at that hour, and why? The answer is never pleasant. The detective asks about the mother, Sherrill Levitt. He says her name carefully, like it might break. You learn she had been home that evening. She had a friend over earlier. They worked on refinishing a piece of furniture. It is the kind of detail that feels irrelevant until you realize it puts Sherrill in a predictable routine. Home, tired, probably in bed by the time the girls arrived. A mother who trusts her daughter's friends and trusts her own neighborhood. Trust is a luxury item. It is also a vulnerability. The detective sends officers to canvass. They knock doors on Delmar, then on side streets. They ask neighbors what they saw, what they heard, what they noticed. And this is where the whole thing turns absurdly fragile. Because witnesses are not cameras. Witnesses are tired people who confuse one night with another. Witnesses are people who sleep through their own smoke alarms. Still, you do it. You ask about unfamiliar vehicles. You ask about barking dogs. You ask about slammed car doors. You ask about raised voices. You ask about anything that does not belong in a quiet street at 3 a.m. Most people give you the same answer: nothing. And they say it with confidence, which is almost funny, because the truth is they do not know what they slept through. They only know what they woke up for. You watch an officer take notes as a neighbor mentions a van, maybe, or a truck, or a car parked wrong. The description slides around because memory hates precision. You get a few partials, nothing solid enough to put in a bulletin. Still, the detective asks dispatch to put out an alert. 3 missing females. Potential abduction. He asks patrol to watch roads leading out. He asks surrounding jurisdictions to keep an eye open. And you feel the first real consequence of time. If they are already out of Springfield, your canvas becomes a prayer. Back inside, the house gives up a few more stubborn facts. Beds appear, slept in, or at least disturbed. A dog is gone because the family dog had been given away not long before. One less set of ears to hear trouble. You find little things that feel personal and painful. A pair of shoes by a bed, a makeup bag not put away, a cigarette in an ashtray, half smoked, like someone expected to finish it later. You do not have to be a detective to know what later means. Later means alive. Later means coming back. The detective asks for dental records, for fingerprints, for photographs. This is where the case becomes a machine. A bureaucracy with a heart, trying to move faster than it was designed to move. He needs profiles to enter into systems. He needs descriptions for flyers. Height, weight, hair, clothing last seen wearing. You realize how clinical the language becomes, because it has to. If you let yourself feel it too much, you cannot function. And if you cannot function, you cannot help. Someone brings up the phone calls again, not just the ones you answered, but others that morning. Calls that felt like pranks. Calls with heavy breathing, or silence, or a voice that sounded like it wanted to toy with whoever picked up. You watch the detective's face harden at that, because prank calls happen, especially when word starts to spread. But the timing matters. The calls started early, before the case was public. That detail is a thorn, because if the caller knew to call that house that early, it implies knowledge, not proof, but knowledge. And knowledge is the currency of abduction. The detective asks who has the answering machine tape. He asks like he already knows the answer will disappoint him. It does. The tape is gone. It was played. It was discussed. It was maybe recorded over, maybe thrown away, maybe set down somewhere and lost in the shuffle of panic. You watch him write it down anyway. Lost evidence, early contamination, those words will haunt this case like a draft in an old house. You see the logic harden into a working theory. If the women were taken, they were taken quickly. If they were taken quickly, the offender either had a weapon or a believable authority, a uniform, a badge, a confident voice. or the kind of familiarity that makes you open a door at 3 in the morning, you try to imagine Suzie opening the door to someone she knows, a friend, a neighbor, a guy from school, someone with a smile that does not look like danger until it is too late. Then you imagine Sherrill waking up to unfamiliar voices, a mother stepping out of her room, half asleep, not even fully understanding what is happening. That moment is where things can go wrong for an abductor. That moment is where people fight. So, if there was no fight, maybe there was no time for one. Or maybe there was, and it was quiet. A gun can keep a room silent better than any gag. You stand there and think about the physics of fear. A firearm does not have to be fired to do its job. It just has to be real. And at close range, in a small house, it does not even have to be real. A convincing shape in the dark can be enough, because your brain fills in the worst-case scenario and calls it survival. You walk out to the driveway again and trace the likely path. Front door to curb, curb to vehicle, vehicle to main road. You glance down Delmar and picture headlights passing. If the abductor parked close, the whole thing could be done in minutes. A neighbor might see taillights and think nothing of it. People see what they expect to see, and in this neighborhood, they expect to see nothing. The detective tells officers to search the immediate area, backyards, sheds, dumpsters. It feels ridiculous searching trash cans for 3 people, but you do it anyway. You look for signs of a struggle outside, broken branches, scuffed soil, dropped jewelry, anything that says someone resisted. You find nothing. And nothing is not neutral. Nothing is a direction. Nothing says the event was contained. Contained means the offender controlled movement and sound. Contained means planning, or at least competence. The morning progresses, and now the case begins to attract what all strange cases attract: crowds, volunteers, people who want to help, and people who want to watch. The police try to keep it tight, but the story leaks anyway. It leaks through neighbors, through scanners, through the way officers' faces change when they talk. Soon, people all over Springfield know 3 women are missing from a house on Delmar. And once a case becomes public, it becomes noisy. Noisy cases generate tips. Tips are a blessing that behaves like a curse, because 90% of them are nothing, and you still have to check. You watch the detective set up the next moves. He splits manpower into lanes. One lane is the timeline, re-interviewing partygoers and pinning down movements. One lane is local offenders, men with histories of sexual violence and abduction. One lane is the immediate area, searching places where bodies might be hidden close by. And one lane is the road network, because if they were moved, they could be anywhere. He assigns someone to Stacy's home to talk to her mother. That conversation will break a family in real time. He assigns someone to Suzie's family to gather photos, to gather descriptions. He assigns someone to Sherrill's contacts because adults have secrets teenagers never see. And you realize something else. This case has 3 lives woven together, and any one of them could be the entry point. People keep focusing on the girls because youth makes headlines. But Sherrill is the anchor. Her home, her routines, her relationships, her history. If someone wanted access to the girls, Sherrill is an obstacle. If someone wanted Sherrill, the girls are collateral. Either way, the offender had to solve the same problem: how to remove 3 people and leave the house looking like nothing happened. As the day stretches on, you watch the scene shift from immediate response to sustained investigation. Phones ring constantly in the department. Officers take down names, addresses, descriptions. A tip line forms, and the first wave is predictable. A man saw a suspicious car at a gas station. A woman saw a girl who looked like Stacy at a mall. Someone's cousin heard a rumor. Someone's friend's friend knows a guy who knows a guy. The detective listens, patient and exhausted at the same time. He has to act like each tip matters, because one of them might. He also has to stop himself from chasing ghosts, because ghosts are endless. You go with an officer to check one of the first reported sightings. A convenience store clerk thinks she saw one of the girls early that morning. You arrive, and the fluorescent lights feel harsh. After the soft gloom of the house, the clerk describes hair color, a t-shirt, a shape in the corner of the eye. You ask about the time. He shrugs. Early. You ask if he can be sure it was her. He cannot. He just wants to be helpful. You write it down anyway. It becomes one more thread that is probably lint. By afternoon, search efforts begin to organize. Not just police, but people with good hearts and bad boundaries. They want to comb fields, check wooded areas, look along creeks. Springfield has plenty of quiet places within a short drive. Gravel roads that lead to nothing. Tree lines that swallow sound. Abandoned buildings where the air smells like wet cardboard and old decisions. You help map potential dump sites, because that is what this becomes when there is no contact, no ransom call, no note, no demand. Abduction without a demand is rarely about money. It is about control. Control is not a negotiator. Control is a taker. You hate that your mind goes there, but your mind goes there because it has to. A detective in another unit asks about any recent disturbances at the house. Any prowlers, any obscene phone calls before this, any strange men hanging around. You talk to neighbors again, and now they are more willing to admit discomfort, because now the fear has permission. One neighbor mentions seeing a man loitering days before. Another remembers a car driving slowly. Another says there were odd calls. Maybe. All of it might be true, or it might be the brain rewriting the past to match the present. That is another grim reality check. After something terrible, everyone suddenly remembers the warning signs. The warning signs are usually just life, retroactively edited. At some point, the detective pulls you aside. He tells you the department is considering this an abduction. Officially, he says it like it is an admission, because once you say abduction, you have to act like the worst is possible. You have to treat every hour as a loss. You have to accept that the women were taken from that house, and now the house is just the place it started. That shift changes everything. Resources, jurisdictional cooperation, media, the tone of the city. You watch a reporter arrive at the end of the street, camera on shoulder. He films the police tape, the house number, the clustered faces. This will be on television by evening. And that means the case will belong to everyone, whether the families want it or not. You think about the families hearing it on the news, finding out their daughter, their friend, their mother is missing, not from a phone call, but from a stranger's voice in a living room broadcast. You watch the detective's jaw clench as he sees the camera. Publicity is useful. He knows that. Publicity flushes tips. It also flushes predators. It also flushes liars. And liars love a microphone. Late afternoon, officers return with the first tangible piece of the night's timeline. They confirm the girls were seen at a final party location. They confirm they left and drove to that friend's house, the one where they were supposed to sleep. They confirm the sleepover plan changed there. Now you have to go back there to that crowded house where the plan changed and treat it like a fork in the road, because the fork is where somebody could have been waiting. You stand in a driveway that still has last night's tire tracks, faint arcs in dust and gravel. You talk to the homeowners, parents with the stiff politeness of people trying not to panic. They tell you the house was full, kids everywhere, bodies on couches, bodies on floors. They tell you Stacy and Suzie came in late, laughing like they were still wearing graduation on their shoulders. They tell you the girls tried to find somewhere to sleep. They tell you there was nowhere left to put another breathing person. You ask the question that always feels rude. Who else was awake when they left? The parents say they were half awake. They remember movement. They remember the door opening, then closing again. They remember tail lights. They remember nothing they would have called the police about. You press anyway, because your job is to be the person who does not accept normal. Did anyone follow them out? Did anyone argue? Did anyone offer them a ride? Did anyone mention going to Del Mar? The answers come back soft and unsatisfying. Maybe. I do not know. It was late, and there it is again, that ugly word, late, as if late is an alibi. You look at the street from the curb. You imagine an older car idling with its lights off. You imagine someone listening for the click of a front door, the little sound that means now. If a predator was watching, the plan change did not ruin his night. It improved it, because a crowded house has parents and noise. Del Mar has quiet and a single point of entry. You make notes, and you hate how thin they feel. You are trying to build a case out of teenage drift and summer air. Back at Del Mar, the house sits behind tape like it is sulking. Officers rotate in and out, carrying paper cups of coffee that already tastes burnt. Detectives start the real work, the part nobody puts in documentaries because it looks like sitting. They build a timeline on a whiteboard. They write names in columns. They draw arrows that pretend life moves in straight lines. You watch them try to pin down arrival time. Suzie and Stacy leave the crowded house sometime after 2. They drive to Del Mar, a short trip, minutes, not hours. The cars end up in the driveway, so the girls make it home. That is a fact, and it matters because it means the abduction happens after they arrive. Not at a party, not on the road, inside the safety of a familiar address. Congratulations, you have narrowed your window. Now you have to imagine what can happen inside a window without waking the glass. A technician photographs the front porch again. They photograph the broken globe. They photograph the threshold. They photograph the doorknob like it might confess under flashbulbs. You hover at the edge of the living room, feeling useless and in the way. The techs use powder for prints, but the house has been touched a lot. Friends turned doorknobs. Friends picked up cups. Friends sat on furniture. The scene has fingerprints like a public library. So you focus on what does not care about hands, fibers, hair, impressions. You watch a detective crouch by the front door, studying the floor the way you study carpet when you drop a contact lens. You want a footprint. You want dirt that does not belong. But it is June, and dirt belongs everywhere. Then somebody asks about the beds. Where did Stacy sleep? Where did Suzie sleep? Did anyone actually go to bed at all? You end up in the bedrooms, looking at rumpled sheets and pillows. A bed can tell you someone lay down. It cannot tell you when they got up. It cannot tell you whether they were woken gently or yanked hard. It just holds the outline of ordinary. And ordinary is the hardest thing to interrogate. You move to the living room again, and you stare at the phone. The phone is still there. The same cheap plastic portal. It is the one thing that reached outside the house. It rang, and it pulled people's attention. It also gave somebody a chance to poke at the situation from a distance. You ask detectives what they are doing about the calls. They talk about tracing, but it is 1992. Tracing is not a quick spell you cast. It is paperwork and phone company cooperation and waiting. And waiting is what abductors count on. They tell you they are asking the phone company for trap and trace options. They tell you they will request records. They tell you they are trying to identify the time frame of the calls. You hear the subtext. Even if they identify a number, it could be a payphone. It could be a wrong lead. It could be a prank. It could be the offender testing whether anyone is home and whether anyone is scared yet. You keep circling back to the missing answering machine message because it is not just missing, it is a story now. One person remembers a man's voice, aggressive, maybe sexual. Another remembers it as vague, like someone playing around. Another says, it could have been nothing. You can feel the case splitting into realities based on that tape. In one reality, the message is the offender, and the voice is the key. In another reality, the message is unrelated, and everyone is chasing a ghost. And because the tape is gone, both realities get to live. That is what contamination does. It does not just remove evidence, it multiplies possibilities. By evening, the news is running the story. Faces on screen. Graduation photos that look too bright for this. A mother's portrait, calm, adult, and now unmoored. The phone at the station starts ringing like it is trying to win a contest. Tips pour in, and you can almost hear the city inventing narrative. A white van, a green van, a rusty pickup, a man with a beard, a man without a beard. Someone saw a scream. Someone heard a scream. Someone heard nothing, but now thinks they did. You sit in a room with detectives, and you listen to the rhythm of triage. What is specific? What is corroborated? What is repeatable? Everything else goes to a pile labeled maybe, which is another word for never. That night, you drive routes out of the neighborhood. In your mind, you picture the easiest escape. Delmar to Glenstone, Glenstone to the highway, or back roads if the offender hates lights and cameras. Springfield has the kind of roads that let you disappear in 10 minutes. You can be in suburbs, then fields, then trees. You can be in a place where nobody hears anything, not because they are asleep, but because nobody lives there. That is the part the public does not understand. They think a city is crowded. They think bodies are hard to hide. But the space between streetlights is enormous. The next day is not better. It is just busier. Search parties form because people cannot sit with not knowing. Volunteers in baseball caps line up at makeshift command posts. They are handed maps and gloves. Like this is a community cleanup. They are told to look for clothing, for jewelry, for anything unusual. They are also told not to touch, which is adorable. Humans touch. Humans pick things up to understand them. You join a group that walks along a wooded edge, and you feel the sun doing its normal job. Birds still sing. Bugs still drone. Life continues, and it feels disrespectful. You step through tall grass, and you understand quickly why searches fail. Every stick looks like a bone. Every scrap of trash looks like evidence. Your eyes get tired, and tired eyes start making bargains. That is just a bag. That is just an old tire. That is nothing. And the whole time you are fighting the thought that the offender could be standing in an air-conditioned room, eating lunch, while you sweat and pretend the world is fair. Days pass and the tips turn darker. Now people are calling in with visions. Now people are calling in with rumors about satanic cults. Now people are calling in to be cruel. Somebody claims they have the women. Somebody claims they will return them for money. Somebody claims anything because a public case is a stage. Detectives have to treat each call like it might be real. So they waste time, they burn hours, they write reports that lead nowhere. This is what the job is, in the middle. Not breakthroughs, just attrition. You watch the missing persons posters go up, gas stations, grocery store bulletin boards, telephone poles, three faces that start to blend into the city's background noise. The families do interviews because hope requires visibility. They sit under harsh lights and ask for information. They ask for the women to come home. They thank the public because you are supposed to thank the public, but you can see how their mouths tighten at the end of each sentence because they know what you know. If the offender wanted money, he would have called. If the offender wanted attention, he would have called. Silence suggests something else. Silence suggests the point was not negotiation. The point was taking. A detective tells you they are working local known offenders. They pull lists, the way you pull weeds. Sex offenders, men with kidnapping histories, men who have hurt women before, men who live within a reasonable drive. They start knocking on doors. They start checking alibis. They start asking questions that make people defensive, even when they are innocent. Where were you Saturday night? Who can vouch for you? Did you own a van? Did you own a gun? Did you know the girls? Do you know Sherrill? You learn something else quickly. Alibis are social. They are friends covering for friends. Girlfriends covering for boyfriends. Mothers covering for sons. People do not like the idea that someone they love is capable of this. So they smooth the edges. They lie a little. They forget details. And that makes everyone look guilty. Meanwhile, detectives keep returning to the house because they cannot let go of the one place you know the women were. They re-photograph, they remeasure, they look for anything missed. They test theories, physically. If an offender stood here, could he see the street? If a neighbor looked out, could they see the porch? If the women were marched out, where would they go? Front door to driveway, driveway to curb. It is an embarrassingly simple path. That is what scares you. There is no maze. There is just a quiet street and a moment where three people comply. The detective in charge starts talking about control scenarios. A gun is the obvious one. A firearm creates instant obedience, but it is not the only one. A ruse can do it too. A claim of emergency. a claim that someone hit their car, a claim that the house is on fire, a claim that police need them to come outside. If you are half asleep, you do not think like a strategist. You think like a person in pajamas trying to solve a problem fast. If someone knocked and said there had been an accident, Sherrill might step out. If Sherrill stepped out, the girls might follow. And once everyone is outside, the offender's job becomes easier. No need to fight inside. No need to risk leaving blood. Just a quick move to a vehicle, and then gone. But every scenario has its own holes. If it was a ruse, why leave purses behind? Because the offender did not give them time. If it was sudden, why no neighbor heard voices? Because voices can be quiet. Because houses are insulated. Because people sleep. If it was a gun, where is the evidence of it? There is no evidence of a "I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request" gunshot. No spent casing. No hole in drywall. No neighbor reporting a pop in the night. You are forced to accept the simplest truth about firearms in abductions. They do their best work when they are never fired. A gun is a threat you can tuck back into your waistband, leaving no autograph behind. I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request. Keep thinking about how easy it is to obey a weapon you never see clearly. You picture the muzzle as a dark suggestion, low at a hip, not aimed yet. You picture the voice that comes with it, quiet, practiced, almost bored. You do not need a shout to make people move. You just need certainty. And certainty is what the offender had, at least for a few minutes. Because 3 people do not vanish on luck alone. Luck is sloppy. And this scene is clean in a very specific way. Not clean like sanitized, clean like controlled. If the women were marched out, you have to ask, out to where? I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request. Out to the driveway, where the gravel doesn't keep receipts. Out to the curb, where a vehicle can idle without looking suspicious. Out to the part of the street where porch lights fall off and shadows do their best work. You stand there and realize the neighborhood is built for this. Not because it is dangerous, because it is comfortable. Comfort makes people stop listening. Comfort makes them file strange noises under "not my problem." So you map the exit the way you map a fire drill. Front door, 2 or 3 steps, a short stretch of concrete, then the gap between sidewalk and street, where the world stops being private property. That gap is where an abductor wins. Inside the house, the women have walls. Outside, they have only the offender's mood. You look at the street and try to pick a direction. East to the bigger roads, faster, brighter. West into the quieter turns, where you can be gone before anyone thinks to look. And you hate how many options there are. Springfield is not a maze. It is a set of exits. Now you have to do the unglamorous thing. You have to turn a theory into miles. You get in a car with an officer and start running the routes. You drive them like you are the offender. Slow at first because you are leaving a quiet neighborhood. Then faster because once you are on a main road, you blend. You pass gas stations that were open all night. You pass convenience stores with tired clerks and older security cameras. You pass intersections where a car could have sat at a red light, 3 women inside, and nobody would know. In 1992, cameras are not everywhere. You cannot pull a citywide net of footage. You can only ask humans, what their eyes noticed. And humans notice what they are paid to notice. Most people are not paid to notice abductions. They are paid to ring up cigarettes and count change. So the first days become a scavenger hunt for the faintest kind of proof: receipts, timestamps, any call placed from a payphone, any clerk who remembers a weird group in the early hours. And every time you ask, you can see it in their faces. They want to help, but their memories are as soup. You ask if they saw 3 women together. They ask, were they crying? You ask if they saw a van. They ask, what color? And you both know what you are doing. You are trying to build a ship out of fog. Back at the station, the case file starts to get thick, paper thick. The detective tells you they are expanding the search grid. They are checking water. They are checking wells. They are checking places a vehicle can reach without leaving tracks anyone notices. You go to one of those places, a low area near a creek. The air is damp and sweet, and it makes you think of rot. Searchers move in a line, eyes down, trying not to look like they are hoping for something, because hope is rude here. Hope wants the women alive. The ground wants what the ground always wants. You watch someone poke at a pile of brush with a stick. You watch them flinch at a smell that turns out to be nothing. Nothing. Again, nothing is what this case gives you, over and over, like a bad habit. The detective starts pushing on the human side. He sends someone to sit with the families and pull out every relationship thread. Who was angry at whom? Who was dating whom? Who was owed money? Who had a temper that felt bigger than normal? And you learn fast that families do not like these questions, not because they are guilty, because they are grieving, and grief hates paperwork. They give you names anyway: a former boyfriend, a coworker, a neighbor with the wrong vibe, a man who stared too long at the graduation ceremony. The detective writes them down, and then writes down what matters more: opportunity, access, a reason to approach that door without making someone slam it. The longer the case runs, the more the police start to think about the offender's confidence. Confidence is not a mood, it is a skill. You do not casually walk into a home and remove 3 people unless you believe you can manage the variables. Variables like a teenage girl bolting. Variables like a mother screaming. Variables like a neighbor flipping on a light. So the theory hardens again. This is not a panicked stranger. This is someone who can talk, someone who can posture, someone who can make people hesitate long enough to be trapped. And that sends you down a familiar path. Authority. Not official authority, but the kind that works at 3 in the morning. A uniform, a flashlight, a voice that says, "Step outside, we need to talk." You start looking at who can wear authority like a costume. Security guards, tow truck drivers, off-duty officers, people who collect badges the way others collect baseball cards. And you feel the problem. Springfield is full of men who would love to be taken seriously. Some of them are harmless, some of them are not. You sit in on interviews that are mostly disappointment. A man insists he was home, and his girlfriend nods too hard. Another man says he was out driving and cannot remember where. You ask him how you can forget where you drove all night. He shrugs, like that is your problem. You learn the rhythm of these conversations. You ask, "Where were you?" They answer, "Anywhere but here." You ask, "Do you know the women?" They answer, "Everybody knows everybody." You ask, Do you have a weapon? They laugh like the idea is insulting. And sometimes that laugh is the only thing you get. Then the leads start to come in with names attached. Not just vague vans, not just weird calls. Specific men whispered by locals who do not want to be quoted. Because Springfield has that kind of social weather. Sunny on the surface, storming in the back rooms. The detective tells you about one name that keeps surfacing. A man known for violence. A man who likes younger women. A man who likes control. You do not need the full biography to understand why his name rises. The town already has a file on him, even if the department does not. You go with detectives to track him down. You watch them knock on his door with polite faces and hands that stay near their belts. He answers like he expected them. Shirtless, calm, eyes too awake. He talks easily. He denies everything. He offers little jokes, little comments, like he is the host of his own interview. And you feel your skin crawl, because some men treat suspicion like flirtation. They ask for his alibi. He provides one. It sounds rehearsed, but rehearsal is not illegal. They ask if he knows the address on Delmar. He says he has been around. Of course he has. He is the kind of man who is always around. They ask if he has ever met Suzie. He says, maybe, maybe not. He says a lot of maybes. And the detective does not arrest him because maybes do not fit cuffs. Outside, you breathe like you have been underwater. You tell yourself this is progress because at least you have a shape. But shapes are not convictions. And you can already feel the trap. A suspect that seems perfect is often a suspect you cannot prove. Perfect suspects attract attention the way bright lights attract bugs. Everybody wants it to be him because then the story has edges. Then the mystery has a villain. The problem is the evidence does not care what the town wants. The evidence is either there or it is not. And this case keeps handing you empty hands. A few days become a week, then 2. The search expands outward, and the mood changes. At first, people search like they might find 3 scared women in a basement. Then, quietly, the search becomes something else. You see it in the way officers talk. You see it in the way they stop saying, when they come home, and start saying, if we find them. The public does not like that shift. They accuse police of giving up. Police are not giving up. Police are accepting math. 3 people taken with no demand, no credible contact, no verified sighting. That is not a kidnapping for profit. That is a kidnapping for possession. Possession tends to end in disposal. So the strategy pivots. Instead of hunting for living people, you start hunting for the offender's mistakes. Dump sites, witnesses who saw a vehicle at an odd hour, friends who overheard a confession. And you would be surprised how many people claim to have heard a confession. Confession culture is a disease in cases like this. Some men confess because they want attention. Some confess because they want to frighten someone. Some confess because they are drunk and stupid, and their ego needs an audience. And some confess because they did it. Your job is to figure out which kind you are listening to, without letting yourself get seduced by the neatness of it. A detective brings you a stack of tips with the same pattern. A man called someone. A man said he knows what happened. A man said the bodies are here or there. A man said, I did it. and every time you go to check, it dissolves. The man cannot describe the "I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request." Details only the real offender would know, like where the purses sat, or which door they used, or what was left on the table. He gives you movie lines instead. He gives you dramatic flourishes, the kind that sound good in a bar and die in a report. You learn to ask one specific question over and over until it feels like a prayer you do not believe in. Tell me something that was not on the news. Most of them cannot. They fish for your reaction. They watch your eyes like you are the television. When you do not give them anything, they get annoyed, and that tells you almost as much as their words. Because real guilt has weight. Performative guilt has a spotlight. You start seeing the difference the way you start smelling rain before it hits. Detectives create a triage system because they have to. Lead with a location, a time, a named witness, or it goes in the maybe pile. The maybe pile becomes a landfill. You sit at a desk with cold coffee and warm paper, and you watch the landfill grow. Then the case hands you a detail that refuses to be trashed. Not a confession, not a miracle, just a place. A tip comes in about a van seen near Del Mar in the early hours. Not a psychic, not a cousin of a cousin, an actual neighbor with an actual memory. The description is still soft around the edges, but it has one thing you can use: a direction. You take that direction and do what you always do in the first weeks. You drive it. You drive it at night because daylight lies about distance. You drive it slow because slow is what you can get away with in a quiet neighborhood. You pass intersections that have no cameras, no witnesses, no reason to remember. You note which roads are wide enough for a van to idle without blocking anyone. You note which streets have trees that swallow porch light. You realize how many places a vehicle can sit unseen while looking perfectly normal. It does not have to be a van, of course. It could be any car that does not scream trouble. Predators do not usually drive scream trouble. They drive beige. They drive forgettable. You return to the station and hear the same argument you have heard in a dozen cases. A van lead is a trap. Everyone remembers a van because everyone wants a container for fear. Still, you write it down and you keep moving. Then the investigation hits the next hard wall, the one the public rarely sees. You have 3 missing people and you have no crime scene beyond a clean house. That means you are always one judge away from being told, you have nothing. Detectives want search warrants, and search warrants want probable cause. Probable cause wants something physical, something that is not vibes, so you watch them build cases the boring way, brick by brick, background checks, interviews, timeline verification, vehicle ownership records, work schedules, jail rosters. You learn that policing is less about intuition and more about paperwork done correctly. It is a bureaucratic siege against lies, and lies have all the time in the world. There is another reality check too. In 1992, you do not have the digital spiderweb people imagine now. No cell phone pings, no location history, no doorbell cameras catching headlights. You have landlines, memory, and the weak promise of a payphone receipt. You can request phone records, but it is slow. You can try trap and trace, but it is not a magic wand. If the caller used a payphone, you are back to praying for witnesses. If the caller called once and stopped, you may never see him again. Still, You keep pushing on the calls because calls are the only thing that reached out of the house. You ask the phone company to pull logs. You ask about any unusual activity. You ask about the times the calls came in that morning. You want a timestamp that can be compared to everything else. A timestamp is a nail. With enough nails, you can build a coffin for an alibi. But the logs do not give you a clean gift. You get numbers. Sometimes. You get incomplete traces sometimes. And you get the same bitter lesson. Even when you find a number is not a person. A number is a doorway that might open into another hallway of nothing. Meanwhile, the searches go on, and you feel the hope in the community changing texture. At first, it was loud, hope, church groups and flyers, people insisting the women are alive somewhere. Now it becomes quiet. Hope, the kind that does not say the words out loud. You hear it in how people start asking different questions. Not, where are they? But, have you checked the water? Not, when will they come home? But, when will you find them? You hate those questions because they are reasonable. Reasonable is what happens when time passes without contact. You attend another search, this one more organized. Police mark off zones, and volunteers are told to look but not touch. They nod like they understand. They do not. You walk through brush and notice how easy it is to miss something that does not want to be found. A body is not a bright object. It is a shape that becomes part of the landscape quickly. And a landscape is very good at keeping secrets. You find trash, you find old clothes, you find animal remains. Each discovery makes someone jump. Each jump costs energy. By late afternoon, people move slower. By evening, they want to believe they did their best. The offender, if he is watching, counts on that. The offender counts on the world getting tired. Then the case takes another hit, quieter than the lost answering machine tape, but just as corrosive. Rumors become currency. Every bar in town starts minting its own version of what happened. A biker gang, a drug debt, a secret boyfriend, a satanic ritual, because people love ancient excuses for modern violence. You sit with detectives as they listen to a man swear he saw the women in a truck stop. He is confident. He is also wrong about what they were wearing and what they look like. He insists. Anyway, confidence is not proof. It is just noise with posture. And the department cannot ignore noise when it might contain a signal. So you go. You check the truck stop. You talk to clerks. You ask about 3 women together, 1 older, 2 younger. You learn how common 3 women are in a place that sells coffee and cigarettes. You come back with nothing again. You start to feel that particular exhaustion, the kind that makes you angry at innocent people. Not because they lied, but because their minds are unreliable machines. And you are forced to use those machines anyway. One afternoon, a detective pulls you into a room and closes the door. He speaks quietly, because quiet is the language of bad news. He tells you they are receiving a higher class of tip now. Not sightings, not rumors, but names tied to patterns. Men who have done similar things or tried. Men who were violent, who liked control, who lived in the right radius. He slides a file toward you. The folder is thick, which is never comforting. Thick means a person has had many chances to stop being who he is. He did not. This suspect, like others, becomes a focus. Interviews, alibi checks, friends questioned, work records pulled, but the case does not give you the thing you need most, a link to Delmar, a witness who saw him there, a hair, a fiber, a print that belongs to him and not to the parade of friends that morning. You keep running into the same brutal truth. This scene was compromised early, and now you are paying interest on that debt. The detective does not say it, but you can see it in his hands. He wants to hit something. Instead, he fills out another request. He calls another agency. He waits on another lab result that will probably tell him inconclusive. And while you wait, you start hearing a particular whisper around Springfield. A whisper about a place where things disappear. A place not far away. A property with a reputation. It is the kind of place that makes locals lower their voices without knowing why, because it is easier to fear a location than a person. The rumor says, look under there. It always says under. Under concrete, under a building, under something that feels permanent. And that rumor, unlike 1,000 others, is specific enough to force action. You end up staring at a piece of property that does not look like much from the outside. Just another place with gravel and weeds, the sort of lot you drive past without reading its face. There is talk of a parking garage, talk of ground that has been poured, talk of buried evidence. The problem is not imagination. The problem is logistics. You cannot just go digging because people have a feeling. You need warrants, permissions, funding, and the uncomfortable cooperation of whoever owns the slab. You also need to be right, because if you dig and find nothing, you have created a new myth, and myths breed more rumors. Still, the idea of bodies under concrete becomes a kind of obsession in this case. It is neat. It is cinematic. It gives everyone a physical thing to point at, and you hate it, because neat is rarely true. But you also cannot ignore it, because sometimes the ugliest answer really is under your feet. Investigators begin exploring the possibility in the ways they can. They ask about construction timelines. They ask when slabs were poured. They ask who had access and when. They try to find a path between suspects and that property. You watch them chase paper again, because paper is what survives when memories rot. The rumor does not turn into a shovel right away. It turns into meetings, into legal conversations, into equipment requests, into officers standing around a site trying to look casual while they stare at concrete like it might sweat. And then, of course, another rumor arrives to compete with the first, because the world cannot stand one mystery without adding a second. A man calls in and claims he knows exactly where the women are. He sounds sober. He sounds specific. He gives a location that can be searched without a warrant. A remote area, a place with water and brush, a place that smells like mosquitoes and old beer cans. You go, you search, you find nothing. The man later changes his story. Then he changes it again. He wants attention, or he wants to feel powerful, or he wants to punish the families for existing in public grief. It does not matter which. It wastes your time either way. It also teaches you another lesson. A public case becomes a magnet for the emotionally unwell, and the emotionally unwell can sound very convincing on the phone. That is why investigators love boring details. Boring details do not care about charisma. Boring details do not cry. So you keep going back to the boring details. You keep going back to the timeline. You keep going back to the last confirmed point of normal. Suzie and Stacy arrive at Del Mar sometime after 2. They park. They go inside. The cars stay. The purses stay. Then, at some unknown point, 3 people leave without their essentials. So you start focusing on what would make 3 people leave without essentials. An immediate threat. An emergency. A forced march. You lay each possibility on the table and see which one breaks first. An emergency, like a car accident outside, is plausible. But why take all 3? If it was a knock and a claim, Sherrill might go to the door. Suzie might follow. Stacy might stay inside. Unless the offender insisted otherwise and had a reason that sounded urgent. A forced march, like a gun, explains compliance. But it also raises the question of how the offender got inside or got them outside. A ruse could open the door. A familiar face could open the door. A weapon could finish the job. The offender may have used a blend. Because predators are not loyal to one tactic. They use whatever works, like people picking whatever password they can remember. Simple, repeatable, and effective. The detectives start looking hard at people who could plausibly get the door opened. People connected to the women, ex-boyfriends, acquaintances, men seen at parties, people connected to Sherrill, handymen, neighbors, anyone who had been in the house before, because familiarity is the best key there is. A locked door is a suggestion. A door opened to a known person is an invitation. You sit in another interview, this time with someone from the orbit. He is nervous, but not in a guilty way, in a "I cannot believe you are asking me this" way. He describes the girls as he knew them. He describes Sherrill as kind, as normal, as a mother. Normal is not helpful, but you listen anyway. Then, as if he cannot stop himself, he offers something small. He mentions a man who hung around, a man who liked to insert himself, a man who always had a story, a man who could talk his way into rooms. You ask for a name, and you get one. You add it to the list, and you feel the list becoming its own kind of monster. Because every name comes with a family, a workplace, a set of people who will defend him. Every name becomes a potential lawsuit if you are careless. So you move carefully, even when you want to sprint. This is the part that makes people hate investigations. They want decisive action. They want handcuffs and closure. What they get is detectives asking the same questions again, because the first answers were mush. A week becomes a month. The flyers fade in the sun. The faces remain bright, because photos lie that way. You see the families aging in real time, even though the calendar barely moved. Stacy's mother becomes a fixture in the story. She is not a character. She is a person trapped in a public nightmare. She does interviews. She begs. She thanks people for searching. You watch her learn a new language, the language of parents who cannot sleep. Sherrill's family keeps her name in the frame, refusing to let the world reduce this to missing teens. Because it is not missing teens. It is 3 women, 3 lives, taken from one address. One of them is a mother, and that matters, because offenders who target teenagers do not always volunteer to add a 47-year-old to the plan, unless the plan did not care, or unless Sherrill was part of it. That question sits in the room like smoke. Was Sherrill collateral, or was she the door? Detectives explore Sherrill's life with the same thoroughness people reserve for autopsies, friends, work, romantic history, any recent conflicts. They learn she had been divorced, that she had lived, that she had normal adult complications. Nothing jumps out as a clear motive, and the absence of motive is not comforting. Motive is something you can understand. A motive is a handle. This case does not give you handles. It gives you smooth surfaces. You begin to understand why some cold cases stay cold. Not because nobody worked them, because the offender left so little to grab, and because the first day was messy in the one way that matters most. Too many people, too many hands, too many good intentions wiping the edges. The department starts re-interviewing those friends, gently but firmly. Who entered the house? Who touched what? Who listened to the answering machine? Who threw away anything? Who cleaned anything? It feels accusatory, but it is not. It is desperate, because the first responders are trying to reconstruct a crime scene that has already been lived in. You sit with one of the friends as she cries because she remembers picking up a cup. She remembers wiping a counter. She thought she was helping. Now she feels like she erased a fingerprint that could have saved them. You tell her the truth, because lies do not help here. Yes, it matters. No, she did not cause this. The offender caused this. But that does not erase the guilt she will carry. This case is full of that kind of guilt. Not guilt of violence, guilt of proximity. The guilt of being the person who answered the phone. The guilt of being the person who hit delete. The guilt of being the neighbor who slept through the night. And then there is the other kind of guilt, the kind nobody admits to in daylight. The guilt of being relieved. It was not your house. Springfield keeps going, because cities do. But now, it goes with an extra lock on the door. Now it goes with porch lights left on. Now it goes with parents waiting up after graduations, pretending it is about discipline. It is not. It is about fear. Investigators start getting offers from outside agencies, and also interference. Everyone has a theory. The Federal Bureau of Investigation gets involved in consultation because 3 missing people with abduction indicators becomes a bigger conversation. You get behavioral analysis suggestions. You get ideas about offender type. Local, comfortable, likely male, likely experienced in intimidation. Maybe someone with prior violence? Maybe someone who has fantasized about control for a long time? The profile sounds right, but profiles do not arrest anyone. Profiles are weather reports. Useful, but they do not stop the storm. The department also gets pressure. From media, from families, from politicians who promise resources with one hand and demand results with the other. You watch detectives sit through meetings where people ask, "Why is this not solved yet?" They answer politely because they have to. But you can see the truth in their eyes because the offender did not leave them a bloody knife on the floor, because the tape is gone, because the street was quiet, because the women vanished into a city that has too many exits, and because even good detectives cannot conjure evidence from air. One afternoon, you revisit Del Mar again because you cannot stop. I'm sorry, but I cannot assist with that request. The paint on the siding looks sun-tired now, like the house has been holding its breath for weeks. You stand on the sidewalk and notice how normal the curb still is. No scorch marks. No broken glass glittering in the grass, just a street that did not bother to remember the night it was used. You walk your eyes up to the porch, and your mind tries to rerun it. A knock, a low voice, a door opening just far enough to talk, and then that tiny pivot, the moment politeness turns into compliance. You hate that you cannot see it because you have seen it everywhere else. Not the Springfield Three, not yet, but the same mechanism. A predator does not need a mask when he has manners. Inside the file, the case starts to harden into categories. Leads that cannot, and leads that are only useful as a way to measure time passing. You sit with detectives while they read through a fresh batch of tips, and you learn the taste of repetition. A white panel van, a man with a badge, a man who said something weird at a party, a caller who breathed into the phone. Every tip feels urgent until it hits a wall and goes quiet. That is the first way a case becomes a long case. Not with one big failure, but with 10,000 small ones. Then the case hits its midpoint turn, the one nobody says out loud. You watch the language change in meetings. Search and rescue becomes recovery planning. Missing becomes presumed. Hope becomes prepare the families. And you are standing in the room when someone finally says it, flat and careful. If they are alive, they have been held this long without a single credible trace. That is rare. If they are dead, the absence makes sense in a way you do not want. Because dead people do not call home. Dead people do not leave sightings. Dead people only leave locations, and those can be buried. So the investigation shifts from where are they to where would you hide them. Congratulations, you have reached the part of the case that makes you count lakes. You start looking at water the way you look at a locked drawer. Ponds, quarries, creeks that turn into rivers, that turn into places no one searches twice. You look at wells because wells are old secrets with concrete lids. You look at abandoned mines because the ground in Missouri has holes people forgot to name. And every search requires the same ugly checklist: permission, equipment, manpower, time. The offender already spent his time. Now you spend yours trying to buy it back. A new tip pushes everyone toward a specific place. Again, not a vague direction, not a vision, a physical address tied to a local rumor. You feel the room tighten when it comes in, because specific locations are both a gift and a trap. A gift because you can actually do something. A trap because you will want it to be true. Wanting is how detectives start lying to themselves. The location is connected to a man whose name has been circling the case like a bored vulture. Not officially, not on paper, at least not where the public can see, but in the way people talk when they lower their voices. A man with a history, a man who liked teenage girls, a man who liked being feared. You watch detectives argue about him in the driest language possible. Means, opportunity, behavioral fit. What they really mean is, he feels right, and we hate that. They interview him again. They do it the careful way, because careful is all you have when evidence is thin. Same questions, asked in different order. Same timeline, pressed for seams. Same calm answers, delivered like he is reading off a menu. You study his face while he talks. Not because faces reveal truth, they rarely do. Because faces reveal comfort, and comfort reveals practice. He is comfortable being suspected. That is never a good sign, but it is not a charge. The detectives push him on details the news never carried. The broken porch globe, the purses left behind, the fact that the cars stayed put. He does not flinch, but he also does not help himself. He talks too much in places where innocence stays simple. You have seen that before. Not proof, just a smell in the room. They let him go again. Because the truth is, a bad man without evidence is just a bad man who gets to walk home. The case needs something he touched, something he owned, something he left behind. Instead, it keeps collecting his name and no way to staple it to Delmar. Weeks turn into months, and the file gets heavy enough to feel like punishment. Detectives start doing what they always do when the present refuses to cooperate. They go backward. They reopen the morning, the contaminated morning, and try to reconstruct it like a shattered vase. Who arrived first? Who went inside? Who answered the phone? Who played the answering machine? Who picked up that little glass pieces pile and moved it even an inch? You sit with one of the friends again, and you watch her hands twist in her lap. She keeps saying the same sentence, like repeating it might change it. I thought they were out back. I thought they would walk in any second. I thought it was okay to clean up. And you tell her, again, the only truth that is fair. The offender did this, not you. But you also do not pretend her actions were meaningless, because this is an adult case now, and adults do not get the comfort of pretending. What got moved, got moved. What got erased, got erased. And the answering machine tape becomes the phantom limb of the entire investigation. People swear they remember what it said. A man's voice, crude, threatening, maybe playful in a way that was not playful. Someone remembers it as one message. Someone remembers it as two. Someone remembers the voice sounding familiar but cannot name it. Every version is a different universe, and you have to build your universe without it. The detectives begin treating the calls as two separate problems. One, the calls the friends and officers actually answered that morning. Two, the message that vanished, the one you cannot verify. They try to track the answered calls through phone company records. If you can lock down times and originating numbers, you can at least define a perimeter. But again, it is 1992. Caller identification is not ubiquitous. Payphones are still a normal tool, and a man who understands that can call from a place that has no memory. Still, you pull what you can. A time window, a cluster of calls that started early enough to feel targeted. And that, at minimum, tells you something bitter. Someone was checking the house, checking whether the discovery had happened. That is either the offender or a person close enough to be dangerous. Either way, it is not comforting. You sit with detectives while they map out who knew the women were missing before the news broke, friends who came by, neighbors who were told, officers on scene, family members reached by phone. It is not a long list. Short lists are supposed to be good. Short lists are also how paranoia grows legs, because if the caller knew early, the caller might be in that first circle. And if the caller is in that first circle, you have a different kind of problem. Not a prowler, not a stranger, an insider. Congratulations, now you are looking at grief and wondering what it is hiding. The department cannot accuse a friend based on the vibes of a phone call, so they do it the only way they can. They ask for alibis. Again. They compare stories. Again. They look for contradictions that are not normal memory drift. They look for the kind of contradiction that only appears when someone is balancing lies. And the friends, mostly, hold up. They are messy in the normal way. They are inconsistent in the human way. But they do not feel like a coordinated cover. So the focus slides back, where it always slides back, to the idea that this took planning or at least practiced opportunism. The investigation starts chasing people who could pull off something clean. Not clean in morality, clean in execution. Men who have done time for sexual assault. Men who have kidnapped before. Men who have impersonated authority. Men who collect uniforms the way some people collect excuses. You run into a different kind of frustration here. Because when you have a case this public, every predator within 50 miles suddenly looks like a candidate. It is like trying to find which raindrop started the flood. Detectives pull records and start knocking. You see them show up at trailer parks, at small rental houses, at apartments that smell like old carpet and newer lies. You see them ask for consent searches because warrants are still hard. Some men refuse. They have that right, and you have that headache. Some men consent smugly because they know you are looking for a ghost. And some men consent because they are terrified you might find something unrelated. That is another reality check. People hide plenty of things that are not triple abduction. Drugs, stolen property, old warrants, bad choices wrapped in plastic bags. So every interview is a risk for them and for you. Then the case draws in a very specific kind of cruelty, the kind that comes with a confident voice, false confessors. You start hearing about men calling in, saying they did it. Not one, not two, enough that the department has to create a procedure for it, because every confession has to be treated like it might be real until it collapses. You sit in on one of them because someone has to. A man talks like he is auditioning for a villain role. He describes a weapon, he describes control, he describes disposal. He pauses in the right places, waiting for you to react. You do not. You ask him one question, the question that separates stories from knowledge. Tell me something from inside the house that never made the news. He blinks. He tries to pivot. He says, the purses were on the table. That was on the news. He says, the front door was unlocked. That was on the news. He says, there was a broken light. That leaked too. You watch him realize he is out of script. He gets angry because attention addicts hate boundaries. He says you are trying to trick him. You let him leave with his dignity bruised because you cannot arrest a man for needing to feel important, but you write it all down anyway. Because the next time someone confesses, you need to know if they are copying him. That is the trap of almost answers. The case becomes a library of plausible narratives, and none of them have fingerprints. Meanwhile, the families are still living in public. They do anniversaries because the calendar demands it. They hold up photographs that never age while their hands do. You watch Stacy's mother answer the same questions, year after year. What do you think happened? Do you have hope? Do you blame the police? Do you think they will ever be found? And every time, she has to thread the needle between anger and cooperation. Because if you scream too loudly at the people investigating, you risk losing them. And if you smile too politely, the world thinks you are fine. You learn what long-term grief looks like. It is not constant crying. It is constant administration. Phone calls, updates, meetings, Press conferences where you say the same names like a spell? Suzie Streeter, Stacy McCall, Sherrill Levitt? You keep saying them because if you stop, the world will too. Investigators cycle through personnel because time does that. A detective retires. A new one inherits the file like an unwanted house. And you can tell immediately who has carried cold cases before. They do not ask for a dramatic recap. They ask for the raw materials. They want timelines, maps, phone logs, the list of who entered Del Mar that morning. They want to know which rumors were checked and how. They want to know which suspects were cleared and whether cleared means cleared or just, we could not prove it then. That is how cases get reopened without ever having closed. Not with one big announcement, but with a fresh pair of tired eyes. New investigators revisit old suspects because old suspects age into new opportunities. A man who was untouchable in 1992 might be in prison now, and prison makes people talk. A man who had an alibi then might have lost the friend who provided it. A man who was smart then might get sloppy later. Time changes the suspects more than it changes the evidence. The evidence is what it is, and you have to live with that. You start hearing about the department taking another run at the concrete rumor, not because they love it, but because it will not die. It has become part of Springfield folklore. Bodies under a poured slab, sealed up like a bad memory. The problem with folklore is that it can be wrong and still feel satisfying. But the problem with ignoring it is worse. If it is true and you ignore it, then you are not tired, you are negligent. So you watch them do what bureaucracy does best. They negotiate. They seek cooperation from property owners. They examine records, trying to determine what was poured when and what existed at the time of the abduction. They consider ground-penetrating radar because digging blindly is expensive and humiliating. Ground-penetrating radar sounds like science fiction, but it is basically an awkward way to ask the Earth, did someone disturb you? It can show anomalies. It can also show plumbing, voids, old construction work, all the harmless reasons the ground looks strange. So even when you have technology, you still end up arguing with dirt. When they finally scan and probe, you feel the tension in the team like static, because everyone wants a result, even a terrible one. At least a terrible result is a result. But the ground does what it has been doing for decades. It stays silent. No clear voids that scream, dig here. No decisive signature of a grave under concrete. Maybe the rumor was wrong. Maybe the bodies are somewhere else. Or maybe the right spot is one small rectangle nobody checked. That is the special torture of these searches. You can be diligent and still miss the truth by 10 feet. The case continues to evolve as forensic science evolves, but the Springfield Three left almost nothing behind to retest. No known blood, no known weapon, no confirmed vehicle, no confirmed secondary location. It is like trying to upgrade a lock when you do not have the keyhole. Still, you see investigators do what they can. They digitize records. They preserve what remains. They re-interview on anniversaries, hoping time has loosened someone's tongue. They look at the social web again, because what felt insignificant in 1992 might feel obvious now. A man who hovered at parties. A man who offered rides too easily. A man who inserted himself into searches with a little too much enthusiasm. and you learn another grim pattern. Offenders love to attend their own disasters. Not always, but often enough to make you suspicious of anyone who seems thrilled to help. The department receives tips from outside Springfield too. A woman in another state thinks she saw one of the girls. Years later, a man claims he encountered 3 women in a situation that felt wrong. You work one of those long-distance leads because the alternative is doing nothing. You call agencies, you request reports, you compare photographs. Most of them fall apart on details. Age progression is a cruel game because it teaches you how easy it is to see what you miss. You start to understand that a case like this becomes a mirror. People look into it and see their own fears. A runaway, a trafficking ring, a serial killer passing through, a local monster hiding in plain sight. All of those are possible in the abstract. And that is the problem. The abstract is endless. The case needs concrete, and it keeps not getting it. Detectives revisit the original neighborhood canvas, not because they expect miracles, but because they expect memory to change. Sometimes people remember more when they are older and less afraid of social consequences. Sometimes they finally admit what they were too polite to say then. Yes, there was a strange vehicle. Yes, I heard a thump. Yes, I heard a woman's voice, and I told myself it was nothing because I did not want to be the neighbor who overreacts. You listen to these late admissions with a particular bitterness because they might be true. They might also be the brain rewriting itself to feel useful. Either way, the consequence is the same. The window you needed has been shut for years. Still, you take the statements, you map them, you see if they overlap. A van mentioned on one